Welcome, everybody, to the Two Becoming One podcast. We are starting a new series called Cultural Myths. We live in a day and a time that allows us to disseminate information at a pace that is impossible for us to consume, let alone digest. It takes personal and corporate discipline to deny ourselves unlimited access to information that has little or no bearing on our lives. In light of this, we're going to start a series of short podcasts that address cultural myths and replace them with truth. For the sake of the series, these cultural myths will apply specifically to marriage and family. They fall into the category of stories we all accept as generally true, and they shape our lives on a regular basis without being actually true. Stories are very important in our lives. Plato said, "Those who tell stories rule society." Consider a few things as we get started. Number one, what is your current worldview? In other words, who or what shapes your world and you are willing to submit to their authority? Number two, who or what do you consult before making decisions? And number three, who or what has the most effect on what you believe and how you live? If the answer to any of these questions are attached to an online social media application, I would ask you to stop and reconsider right now. Let's prepare our hearts to wrestle with these myths in the light of the true story of the world. My name is Ryan Arneson, and we are tackling our first cultural myth today. It's a big one. The myth that perception is reality. You've probably heard this phrase before, and I hate to burst your bubble, but perception might be your reality, but it might not be actual reality. Our perceptions are shaped by our experiences, by how we grew up, by our culture, our personal stories, even our feelings and emotions. It might feel real, but that doesn't make it real. Let me give you a quick example from my own marriage. When we first got married, my wife would come with me to our family gatherings on my side of the family, and every time she'd walk away saying, "I can't believe you talk to your brothers like that." To which I would reply, "Like what?" What she was really saying was, families aren't supposed to talk to each other that way, and please don't talk to me like that. Actually, she literally said that to me. Right there you can see two people, two perceptions, one reality. Now, because I'm kind of a nerd about this stuff, I wanted to dig into where did this phrase come from. Back in the 1800s, there was a French novelist who said, "There is no truth, there's only perception." He was challenging the idea of objective truth. If you fast forward to the 1980s, there was a political strategist named Lee Atwater who made the phrase "perception is reality" famous during George Bush's presidential campaign. He realized that if you could shape people's perception, you could shape their version of reality, whether or not it was actually true. And honestly, that idea has stuck around in American culture. Just listen to some of the phrases we hear all the time. Live your truth. You do you. As long as you're not hurting anyone. Be true to yourself. Only you can decide what's right for you and write your own story. Notice the pattern? It all centers on you, your truth, your story, your perception. But here's the problem. When everyone's perception is truth, no one's truth is stable. So how does this show up in our communication, especially in our marriages and families? A friend of mine reminded me recently that humans communicate through encoding and decoding. The sender, the one speaking, encodes a message, and the receiver, the listener, decodes it based on their own experience, emotion, and background. In American culture, we tend to put all the responsibility on the sender. Say it right so they'll understand. In other words, we emphasize being understood more than getting understanding. But real communication, especially in marriage, depends on feedback, and a lot of feedback isn't verbal. It's a look, a sigh, a posture. For example, I always know when I'm making my wife anxious because she starts rubbing her bottom lip, just like her mom used to. There are different models of communication. There's one-way communication where our goal is to transmit our message, like this podcast. I'm talking, you're listening. Not a lot of feedback happening here. Then there's two-way communication, like when I ask my wife on a daily basis, "Where's my phone?" And she points out that I left it in the kitchen. That's simple back and forth communication, and these interactions happen throughout all our days. But the model I think we struggle with most in our culture is what's called a transaction model. And that's where we don't just exchange messages, we build relationships. We shape our identities, we form alliances, and create community. We just don't talk about reality, we construct it together. When I got married, my perspective shifted from my reality to our reality. And if you're married, you know what a battle that can be sometimes. I didn't realize how selfish I was until I got married and became a parent, and I find myself constantly discerning the difference between my priorities and my preferences. For instance, before I got married, floor seats to the Suns game was the highest priority in my life on any given day. But after I got married, the commitments I made to my wife and my kids took priority. So if you're like me, and I'm assuming you are, we tend to define our reality through our internal narrative, the stories we tell ourselves, and through our feelings and emotions. These are great indicators, but they also distort our perception of reality, especially in our marriages and our families. Think about your own stories. We all have stories running around in our head, and often we bring those stories into every interaction. You might not even realize it, but you're assigning people roles in your story while you're talking with them. Ever been in an argument with your spouse and thought, what is happening right now? You're arguing about something simple, but their reaction is huge. That's because you said something that sounded like what their dad used to say, and now you're caught in an old story they promised themselves they'd never relive. Or taking it one step further. Maybe you've had a full-blown argument with your spouse and they weren't even there. You're driving home, playing out an entire conversation in your head, and by the time you walk in the door, you're already frustrated with them and they haven't even said anything yet. Ask yourself, what's feeding my internal narrative? What am I holding on to? What do I gain or lose by keeping that story alive? Let's talk about our feelings and emotions. Our culture says, if you feel it, it must be real. We treat our emotions like moral compasses, but if our emotions are our compass, then we are the North Star, and in that worldview, the highest moral duty is self-fulfillment, not self-sacrifice. But Scripture gives us a different picture. Galatians 5 says, "For you were called to freedom, brethren, only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another." And 1 Corinthians 13 says, "Love doesn't insist on its own way. Love rejoices in the truth. Love bears, believes, hopes, and endures all things." That kind of love doesn't weaponize truth, it lives it out. It seeks understanding more than being understood. In the past 3 years, Jan and I have moved 4 times, twice across the country, and I've had 4 different jobs. We had 2 kids graduate college, and our oldest daughter got married. Although we've been through the same things together, we both had a very different perspective on this season. When Jan and I moved back to Tempe from Tennessee last summer, we could not agree on what house to buy. I wanted to repurchase our old home. She wanted something new. I realized I was being driven by a story, a longing to recreate something I lost when my parents divorced, that coming home feeling, especially for our kids. For Janet, she wanted to start fresh and put this season of stress and uncertainty behind us. It got emotional. We needed help. We brought others in to see our blind spots to help us move from my reality and her reality to a shared reality. We learned some things in this process that we want to share. Truth is important, but gaining understanding is more important than being understood. Take your feelings and emotions before God because they're good indicators of what's going on in your heart, and ask Him to give you wisdom as to where they are coming from. Be honest about your internal stories, but assume the best about each other rather than wanting to be right or win. At the core of the statement, perception is reality, we find that most of us just want to convince the other that we are right, but that is not what it's really about. Learning to move from perception to truth teaches us that we are not at the center of the story And we can move from isolating ourselves to unity, from being right to getting right, because at the end of the day, getting right is more important than being right. Thank you again for joining us at the Two Becoming One podcast. We'll talk soon.